Okay, well, it's my great pleasure to welcome you on this chilly day, to give you a warm welcome to this virtual webinar. And to introduce myself, I'm Seb Crutch. I'm one of the psychologists at the Dementia Research Centre, very involved in co-leading rare dementia support. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our latest later stage carer support group meeting. As always, we would rather be with you in person, but we're delighted that so many of you can join us. I think there's over 100 people registered for this meeting. So from across the country and further afield, this is a great opportunity for us to meet together to discuss and hear views and perspectives, particularly on today's theme of later stage care options. We talk about these issues frequently in these meetings and in our disease-specific support group meetings, but I think it's particularly timely at the moment with all the public debate, at least here in the UK, around potential changes and planned changes in social care policy and funding. It's a great opportunity to be able to discuss these issues today. We've got a fantastic group of speakers who I'll introduce you to in a moment. But for now, I thought I would just raise a couple of housekeeping issues, if that's okay, as a few more people join us. So one is to mention that we'll have 3 video or live presentations with people giving personal and professional perspectives on this issue. But then there's an opportunity and a question and answer panel at the end with a number of people coming at this issue from different angles. And we would love to have your questions, your thoughts. It might be that you want to ask very practical questions. How do I find out what the options are in my area? How can I consider what might be appropriate for me? Things about timing, choice of carers, those sorts of issues. Or it might be that you want to ask of the panel and of other members who are attending the group today, more personal or emotional reflections on this issue, how people have come to make the choices that they have, how they feel about those choices now, and also what it feels like to be potentially addressing and planning for a transition that you don't know when further care or further support might be helpful or beneficial to you, and what that will mean for you as an individual, as a couple, as a family, as a group of friends. So for that question and answer session, please do feel free to share those questions. There's a Q&A box. And if you could put your questions in there, we will, behind the scenes, Alicia and the rest of the team will be collating those questions so that we can put them to the panel towards the end. There's also a chat box. Please feel free to use that to say hi to people, to make comments on the speakers, hopefully on what they're saying rather than anything more personal than that. But try and keep your questions in the Q&A box for us if that's okay, so no questions in the chat box. A couple of other quick reminders are that we're recording this meeting, as we do all of our main meetings, so that people who haven't been able to attend at the time are able to catch up afterwards with the discussion. So just to let you know. And also, please don't panic if you hear something that sounds really useful to you or that you'd like to follow up and get more information about, but don't have a pen to hand or it passes too quickly. Please don't worry. All of the resources that we discuss during today's meeting, or which are recommended by different speakers or members of the wider group, will be shared with you by email after the meeting, so you won't miss out. Okay, so I think enough introduction from me. I'm very pleased. I will just do a brief introduction because our next 2 speakers are going to introduce themselves, but I'm really pleased that Nikki Zimmerman, our direct support team lead, has recorded a conversation with Sarah Jane Giardelli, one of our fantastic support group members, talking about her experiences of this issue of later stage care and how to make the right choices. And I hope that will come through clearly now. So I will disappear off. I will see you in a few minutes and I'll leave you with Nikki and Sarah Jane.
Good morning, everybody. It's fantastic to be here with you. I'm Nikki Zimmerman. I'm the direct support team lead at Rare Dementia Support, and I'm delighted to be joined by Sarah Jane this morning. Good morning, Sarah Jane.
Morning, how are you?
Really good. And thank you so much for spending time with us today. It's going to be really, really useful for people. So for the members that are watching, can you give us a little bit of a background about your life with Adrian and sort of running up to sort of his diagnosis?
Yeah, sure. So Adrian and I met 17 years ago, and we've been married for 12 years. Adrian's background from career-wise was he ran his own courier company. So he was the managing director of his courier company. He was very smart, very organised. My background is in nursing. And when Adrian and I got together and settled down, I became a stay-at-home mum, still with the Sergeant Major nursing background. We have two boys. So my oldest is 19 and nearly 20. He's at university now. And my youngest has just turned 11. So busy household with two dogs, two cats, and the whole kit and caboodle. So effectively, we've had a lovely life, very blessed. But about 9 years ago, when Adrian was 50, I started noticing small changes just in his organisation, memory, just very, very small and difficult to put the pieces of the puzzle together. I imagine much the same with other people's experiences. It's quite hard to pinpoint what's wrong. But he always used to make an excuse that because I'm so uber organized, it was easier to rely on me than to actually have to make the effort to remember things himself. But that excuse didn't really last very long. And I started noticing his mental arithmetic declining, his cognition declining. And when I was able to answer a maths problem in my head quicker than he was able to remember the question, I knew something was really not right. And actually, I think probably with many other people, getting into the doctor was the trickiest part of all. And then actually going through all the tests was even harder because, dementia was really the last suspect. And actually, just because of the age, it's the last suspect to be responsible for the symptoms. So it took about 9 months for us to actually get a formal diagnosis. And we thought actually naively that when we got the diagnosis, it would be a really positive turning point. Sort of we knew what we were facing, but actually it was pretty much the sword upon which we all fell, because it kind of all imploded from there. And that was now 4 years ago. So and it's been a really difficult journey.
It really has for you, but recently there's been really quite a dramatic decline, and this must have had such a huge impact for you and the family.
Yeah, the decline, I think that the problem with the decline is obviously it's managing expectations and understanding the disease. And the difficulty is that everybody has a different trajectory. Everybody, has a different progression. And with Adrian, it was quite slow to begin with. And so we thought we were coping quite well. And mostly it was just his probably more psychological response that was difficult to manage. But then he started becoming quite behaviourally aggressive, and that was difficult to know whether it was the psychological impact or if it's actually part of the disease. And as time went on, we realised that it was actually more sort of frontotemporal presentation. The difficulty with the speed at which he's declined is this constant adapting to learning how to manage and cope and preempt, and also managing the children's expectations, because the more you read into things, the more you look up and you research, you can understand, oh, that's attributed to this, or that's why he's doing that. Actually explaining that to the children at a time when the behavior is actually happening is really difficult. And when it's constantly changing and evolving, you feel like you're always playing catch up and you're never actually able to look after the person or give the person that you're caring for your best, because you're never really on point. And I think that's the hardest part with the decline. He 2 summers ago had quite a big seizure that came out of the blue, and I think that was the turning point for realizing that we were far further into this than we'd originally anticipated. And unfortunately he never really recovered that cognition, so it sort of spiraled out of control from there.
And you've had a lot of good support locally. You know, we've spoke about this before, that you have felt that you have had support, but navigating the sort of continuing healthcare process has been extremely complex and really traumatic for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think the thing that was most surprising for me is because it's such an unusual process. Not everybody within the multidisciplinary team has actually gone through it. And it's usually applied for once the people that are living with dementia are already in a formal care setting. So the multidisciplinary team, so your CPNs and your community social workers, don't always get that involved. And certainly our psychiatric nurse had never actually been through the process. And actually understanding the intricacies of it, we were both thinking that we're going down one road and actually finding out that actually that's not how the process works at all. There's another hoop and there's another hoop. And so for me, it was a real eye-opener, because finding the right care home for somebody who's so young is already near to impossible. Then finding somewhere that's the right place that has availability is also pretty difficult. And then finding the right place that has availability but only accepts the continuing healthcare funding was just crazy. So we had to go through the application. We thought that it would be quite straightforward because he was more than eligible according to their criteria. The nursing home had felt that he fully met their needs, and that they could meet his. And so we're sitting there going, right, so there's a bed waiting, but it's this process, and we had to go through a 3-hour interview, which ordinarily the clinical manager would go through. And I don't know what we did, but we managed to secure the funding, which is unheard of. Thinking that would be it, but no, there's another hoop and another hoop. And eventually it went to the brokerage team at social services for due diligence. And they refused to put him in the care home of choice because they looked at 14 other ones that I felt were inappropriate from an age demographic. And the only reason he ended up in the care home of my choice was because every other nursing home, so all 14 of them, refused to accept Adrian based on his complex needs and long-term needs. And so they conceded that, yes, okay, we'll agree to put him where you feel is best and in his best interest. But from an urgent referral from the care home to actually the day that he moved in was over 2 months. Yeah, it is a constant waiting for the phone to ring, a constant waiting for, just chivvying people along. Have you made a decision? What's happening? Has the paperwork been submitted? Has it been received? A lot of chasing, which is, it's just like constantly waiting for exam results. It's constantly waiting to know you can move to the next stage of, planning. So that was very, very tough, very tough. And actually even the CPN, our CPN and the rest of the team were breathing very, very large sighs of relief when it was all over, because I don't think they'd ever been through a process like it before.
Must have been utterly exhausting for you.
Yeah, it was very draining. And I suppose that the difficulty with it was that was sort of almost like behind the scenes for me, because obviously I couldn't let Adrian know what was going on. So I had the guilt of working so hard to do what the right thing for him was, with him in the other room, and actually constantly flitting from meeting to meeting and going to interview to, meetings with the MDT, going to see the nursing homes. And that's quite a strange psychological place to be. You do feel like you're sort of, on one hand, sort of working really hard to do what's right, but on the other hand, throwing someone under a bus because they have no idea what you're sort of doing. And that didn't sit very well with me. But it wasn't a great period of time. I was quite unwell during it. And it's just, I suppose, the anxiety of constantly waiting for news and information that just sort of wreaks havoc with your sort of nervous system. Gosh,
yes. So you've touched on sort of the emotional sort of roller coaster that you've sort of gone through, and the last 6 months especially must have, have been huge for you and your family, sort of protecting your family, trying to do the right thing, trying to meet Adrian's complex needs. How have you managed that?
Well, each day at a time. And actually, I think the hardest thing for the coping strategies was actually realizing that there would be a point where I wouldn't be able to cope. And especially given my nursing background, it was something that I never thought a point that I would never thought that I would reach. And so that didn't feel great, actually having to accept that his needs were greater than I could deal with at home. But also doing the right thing for somebody that has no impact on anyone else is a responsibility, a massive responsibility in itself. But then when you have to take into account the children and a family and what's best for everyone, knowing full well that it's never going to be right for everyone, we're all going to have to compromise. That's quite torturous. And there's been a lot of guilt. I mean, as I said, Adrian particularly had quite a lot of behavioural presentations, which were difficult to manage. And it's really taken its toll on all of us. Mostly the little one doesn't have the maturity to understand. So he's started developing tics at school. His ability to focus on work and to sort of sit still has become quite challenging for him. He's been having counselling for a number of years. The older one flits between guilt and concern and worry, having seen me decline in health. I've lost a lot of weight, I was shaking, and obviously it looked quite scary because I wasn't sleeping. And very irritable, with pretty much everyone, because I was just so fractious all the time. And for Bruno as well, since he was 15, he has been the physical barrier between Adrian and myself and his little brother, because at 6 foot, he was always wanting to put himself between us to protect us. And that's quite a big thing for kids to have to go through. So there's a lot of flitting between different emotions, and the guilt, I think, is the worst one of all. It's the worst one of all, because it's the self-doubt, it's the could I have done more, have I thrown the towel in too soon, and actually trying to ignore the opinions of others that aren't in the arena. It has been the hardest thing.
And it's so difficult, isn't it, when everyone outside has got that opinion and they're not living it day to day like you are.
Yeah.
And I really sort of hope things are much more stable now, and you can help sort of move forward with this. Finally, I really just want to thank you for sharing your experience with us today, but to ask if you've got any advice at all that you could give to anybody out there.
Everyone's journey is so different, isn't it? And people's coping strategies are so unique to their own circumstance. The thing that I have found that has been invaluable to me is taking one day at a time. In my nature, I like to sort of anticipate everything, prepare for everything. And what I've learned over the last few years is that nothing's gone to plan. And so it's just wasted energy looking too far into the future. So it's about rechecking. That's been invaluable to me. Also, I've had incredible family members who've allowed me to offload whenever I like. And that's been a really good tool, because actually, when you trust someone enough to know that they're not going to get bored of the offloading, it means that you can actually vent properly. Whereas with friends, you sometimes think, oh, do they really want to know how I am? Because we might be here a while. Walking the dogs as well has given me daily headspace and perspective. The fresh air and just being out of the house and having the enjoyment of my dogs has just has enabled me to see things a little bit more clearly, walk back through the door with a renewed smile-ish. And actually gives you the ability to be a little bit more compassionate. So it just reboosts your batteries a little bit, recharges everything. The only other thing that I would say is try and separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of the input. And I've had a lot of negativity from people on Adrian's side of the family and friends who all have their opinions, as we've said, and they're entitled to their opinions. But actually having to justify it to people who aren't living it 24 hours a day is just not helpful for anyone. And what I've realized is the stronger I am and the happier I am, the better a wife I can be to Adrian. And so allowing yourself that happiness and giving yourself permission to be happy, which seems like a really incongruous thing to do, given that we're in quite a strange situation, but has actually been a far more productive way of living our lives. And It was actually our speech and language therapist who had said to me a while ago, you know, has it ever occurred to you that with Adrian in care, you'll be able to be a better mum to your children, and you'll be able to be a better wife to your husband? And it may not look like it at the beginning, but actually that's the reality of the situation, because I have the strength now, and I've allowed myself that happiness to move forward and be the best I can be for my kids and for Adrian and for myself, because that's also really important.
It really is. It's so important. And what wise words. That's great. You know, it's sometimes those things you just need to take, isn't it, and keep. Thank you so much. Sarah Jane is going to be on the panel today. I'm sure what she spoke about is resonating with lots of you there. So please do send your questions in the question box, and we'll be there answering questions later. Sarah Jane, thank you once again.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you from me as well, to Sarah Jane and to Nikki, and for your wisdom, Sarah Jane, for your honesty and your compassion, both to yourself and indirectly to everyone else listening to that, because I'm sure that will have struck many chords. There's so much in what Sarah Jane said, which I'm sure people would like to pick up on later. One sentence that stands out, or phrase that stands out particularly as being central for today's theme, is about thinking what's best for everyone. And it's so hard sometimes, particularly in a world where we tend to attribute a diagnosis to one individual. Someone has this thing, and actually, of course, with all of the conditions we're talking about today, these conditions don't just affect one person, they affect whole families, whole systems, whole networks. And so everyone is impacted by these diagnoses. And that's why we have these faced with these difficult choices, and with hopefully positive days like today to help you reflect where in your situation some of these truths, some of these the bits of advice, some of these ideas might fit in, so that you can try and also make that call about what will be best for everyone, and allow yourself some space within that as well, rather than being constantly selfless. And also so many great words there about, very struck by the phrase of the opinions of those outside the arena, which is a terribly diplomatic way of putting something which I'm sure will have been at times encouraging, at times tricky, at times downright painful for many of you. So many things to pick up on. Just a reminder that there was opportunity to ask questions at the end, but also to share experiences. I realize you can't see each other on the screen today, but if you would like to share a few words about your own experience, I'd be very happy to give voice to those words in the panel discussion later, just so that others can take these different perspectives. So thank you once again. And now it's my pleasure to introduce another video, this time with Lynn James, who's the owner of Visiting Angels, a fantastic care service, who I'm sure will have met people in all sorts of different situations and scenarios with different decisions to make and at different times. And it's great that we've got Lynn with us now for a brief presentation, but also on the panel later on for your questions. And so without further ado, I shall hand over to Lynn.
Hello, my name's Lynn James. I'm the owner and registered manager at Visiting Angels. Visiting Angels are a home care provider, and we help people to stay living in their own homes for as long as they possibly can. You'll probably hear the word domiciliary care, which is often used by professionals to describe what home care actually is. It's worth noting that any home care provider needs to be registered with an organisation, a government body called the Care Quality Commission, often called the CQC. So that's one thing to be aware of, that if you are looking at employing a care provider, check that they are registered with the CQC. And on their website, you can see the inspection reports of companies, and they're often rated good, outstanding, requires improvement, etc. So there are literally hundreds of care companies out there, and it's a really important decision. There are a lot of people to choose from, and a lot of people that are saying the same thing, but don't always necessarily deliver. So again, it's good to get personal recommendations, talk to colleagues, users of services, and also there's independent review sites called, for example, homecare.co.uk. which will give an independent review. And we always ask our clients to give us a review, and they do check back with the clients. So, it does give some level of objectivity. So again, it's, Nikki's asked me to speak today about, what home care can offer. So again, as I've said, I know it's such an important decision. I spent 15 years working for the Alzheimer's Society and would sit in homes with families probably like yourselves, listening to their experience and encouraging them to accept some help, only to find that when that help came, it wasn't necessarily right for them. So it is important that you get this decision right for you. Otherwise, it just may cause you some additional stress. So again, with these hours and hours that I would sit with families, I said encouraging the acceptance of help, my experience has shown that really, if you don't have some help, and even just a little bit of help early on, or as early as you can, the risk of burnout is there for you, which means the risk of the person going into care prematurely is increased. It's better to have a little bit of help now than wait until you can't cope any longer. We all know that when you take on the care of another person, you don't only take on that person's care, you also take on the roles and the tasks that they did. For example, managing finances, shopping, cooking, cleaning, all of the practical stuff, as well as maybe the hands-on care for the person who needs looking after. So without a break, a carer of a person with dementia can become exhausted and it can become overwhelming. And unfortunately, that may lead to an admission into a care home. So my plea is that you think about what would make a difference in my life. What practical jobs can I get rid of that would make my life easier and would make me more free to care, or would give me the chance to maybe empty up my sort of stress and tolerance jug. I often talk about caring for a person being almost like a jug of water that you keep filling it up and filling it up and filling it up, and it only takes a few drops for that to all spill over. So it's good to get in and have some rest early on. So even 2 hours a week sometimes can make all the difference. So you may have come across home care, stories in the press about you don't know who's coming, what time they're coming, if they're going to come at all, they're in and out, it's only 15 minutes, etc., etc. So there are two main types of home care provider. There are the volume providers that are often commissioned by councils to provide personal care, because the councils do have a statutory responsibility to make sure that vulnerable adults are assisted with personal care. It's all about washing, dressing, eating, drinking, medication and safety. There are then the private care companies who move to the rhythm of the client. They're directly commissioned by clients to do the thing that will make the most difference to them. And often people don't know that this option exists because nobody tells them. So if you have more than £23,250 in your own right, that's the person with the care needs has got that amount of money, you automatically become a self-funder, which means that you then commission your own care. That said, if you are eligible for council-funded care, you can still ask for that allocation to be given to you as a direct payment so that you can then choose the care company that would best suit you. So it is important to have these, to have this knowledge so that you can ask the councils, okay, I'm not totally happy with that particular care provider, give me the money and I'll arrange it myself. The difference is that the councils often give around £18 an hour for care, whereas in real life, the actual cost of delivering care is nearer to sort of £25, £26 an hour. Their companies often charge in the region of £27 to £30 an hour. So you can see there's a bit of a disconnect there, and it's no surprise that sometimes the quality is a little compromised, especially when often we'll take over clients who have had a volume provider doing 35-minute calls and 30-minute calls that you just cannot achieve personal care in 45 minutes or 30 minutes. And I say, I know how long it takes me to get ready in the morning. I haven't got aching limbs or dementia. People need time, and that's often what the councils sort of can't necessarily pay for. So question whether, if you're eligible for care, can you have the funding and you can top up, or be very, if you're paying for your own care, also be sort of quite choosy as to who you commission. So care at home can be flexible. Purchasing your own care can help you say what would make a difference to you. You're visiting angels, for example. One of our questions is, what time would you like to get up? Do you like to have your breakfast first before you get dressed? Would you like to have your breakfast in your dressing gown? Do you like to have your shower at night? It's all about choice. In fact, one of our clients recently said, oh, all these choices, but it is about choice. And it's about never forgetting that this is a huge decision for you, and that we're also a guest in your home. It's a hard hurdle to get over. However, you can have the equivalent of 8 hours of care at home for the same price as a care home. And people tend to want to be surrounded by their own life possessions, their memories of things that they've bought on this holiday, or the kids, or even though it may not be maybe conscious memory, there's some level of familiarity there. And there's also something about having a cup of tea when you want a cup of tea, watching what you want on the telly, going to bed when you want to. So that's the difference between a home care provider and maybe going into a care home. I think the gist of it is that the world's almost your oyster with private care. We will do whatever it is that will make a difference to your life, as long as it's legal and as long as it's not unsafe. Examples of what we do with clients experiencing dementia at the moment is that we do help some people with personal care. We will help them either in the morning or in the evening, dependent on what their routine is. We'll often help around meal times. Sometimes that can be more like prompting, just keeping a discreet eye on. Sometimes the fact that someone's turned up at 8 o'clock in the morning might be that little bit of a nudge to say, okay, right, I'll put the kettle on. Or we might even say, you put the kettle on and I'll run the bath. It's really about that particular client. With some clients, we stay at home with the client whilst the carer goes out to meet friends or have coffee or do some essential jobs. We visit another client for 6 hours a day once a week, and the carer, the caregiver, the paid caregiver, and the client go off to the pub. They go for a walk, they go to the pub, they walk back, do a bit of tidying up. But that just gives their family carer a much needed break to recharge their batteries and feel all the better for caring afterwards. The list is absolutely endless. So don't dismiss, don't think there's no other option. And I think that's sort of my plea to you as well. There can be another option. So just ask. I'm happy to talk to anybody about what the home care options might be. And it's literally about you. It's about you and what would make a difference to your life. There might be certain jobs that you have to do because the person with dementia will only accept that help from you. But let's take away maybe some of the responsibilities around you. And it might be the practical stuff like changing the bed, running the hoover around, just being there to sort of support the person in your absence. If there are any questions, you can always give me a call, and Nikki has got my details. I hope that's been useful.
Well, in answer to Lynn's parting question, I would say yes, very, very useful. Thank you so much, Lynn. It's a really, really clear explanation and introduction to a world that a lot of people, as you say, may have been unfamiliar with. And of course, people's opinions sometimes will be coloured by things they hear in the press and the media. And it's great to hear a very different approach outlined, where choice and preference and freeing people up is so much to the fore. And I don't know about you, but I particularly found it helpful that Lynn framed a lot of what she said in terms of the questions many of you may ask yourselves when approaching this. Questions about what would make a difference in my life, what would free me up to care, what would take away some of the responsibility from around me. I thought it was particularly interesting, Lynn's use of words, responsibilities around me. It's not about removing responsibility from me. It's about lightening the load a bit. And I think that really gets to this question of picking away at the assumption that if you take on care that you're somehow conceding or giving in, which is some of those, well, sometimes those voices from outside the arena, as Sarah Jane put it, will infer or imply. But what Lynn was very clearly saying there is about taking around some of the responsibilities around you to help you maintain the responsibility that you want for your loved one. So hugely helpful, and thank you. And of course, Lynn will also be on the panel later. So you can raise direct questions with her. And thank you for all of you who have already sent questions and answers in. And please do keep them coming. We will squeeze in as many as we can during the panel time. For those we don't get to today, we will try and address them after the meeting. And where appropriate, it's also good for me to remind you all that if anything today is raising issues that you don't feel able to bring up now, but that you would like individual support with, you can always be in contact with us individually between meetings via contact at Rare Dementia Support, and Nikki and the team will be only too pleased to try and support you as best they can. So speaking of Nikki, we've already seen her once. You now have the pleasure of seeing her live. Very sorry that we were hoping to have Trish O'Hara, another fantastic and dynamic member of the direct support team, with us today, but she's sadly poorly. So I'm very, very grateful both to Nikki and to Hannah Gardner, an Admiral nurse member of the direct support team, for stepping into the breach and delivering a live presentation about both personal and professional perspectives on this issue. So Nikki and Hannah, over to you.
Thanks, Seb. And I do apologise. I feel you've been shortchanged today, having two lots of me and not Trish here. But it's great to be here speaking live and with Hannah as well. Me and Hannah work very closely together in the direct support team. She's a great asset to our team. And hopefully today we can talk a little bit about care homes, but also about our personal experience as well. I think it's always good that we can share that with you members as well. So we're looking sort of at the care homes and nursing homes, and sometimes this is an alternative option, you know, from carrying on what Lynn's been talking about this morning. Sometimes it's the only option as well. So what we want to do is sort of give you a little bit more information and sort of dispel some myths that are out there. And when we talk about going into care home, it's about transitioning into care home. We don't put people into care homes, we transition them because it's the best place for them. It meets their needs. And often when we are having these discussions, it can be quite difficult for families. Me and Hannah, and as Lynn says, you know, we've had these difficult conversations when people need extra care. I mean, sometimes I've had conversations with people at an early stage, and, you know, families have said, and the person living with dementia have said, you know, I want to go into a care home later. I don't want to be a burden on my family. I want my family to be able to spend good quality time with me. But, you know, I think that's going to be the best place for me. And when people have those conversations, it's fantastic. It's not always an easy conversation, and it's very difficult for a lot of people to even have. But when people do, it's very positive, and it gives them some choice and some control themselves. And we can help people to look at what sort of care homes are going to be suitable for them and make those choices. And so, you know, we always do try and encourage people to be prepared and have a look early on. And there's lots of choices out there, and it's sort of called on what's going to meet people's needs. Now, Hannah, do you want to talk a little bit more about complex needs and what the choices are out there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, lovely to be here today to talk about sort of care homes. Sort of supporting carers, we often talk about care homes, and often we talk about nursing homes, and often what's the difference between a care home and what's the difference between a nursing home. And really going to talk now about nursing homes and what you can sort of expect, and why would you put someone in a care home. So care homes have registered nurses there who provide 24-hour care. So in the community you have the district nurses, but in a nursing home there's a nurse providing care to the residents who have often very high complex needs with a lot of different conditions as well. We're often not just dealing with someone with one condition, we are dealing with people with many conditions such as diabetes, dementia, and cancer as well, so end of life care as well. So they're often very experienced nurses who deal with people with very complex needs. And then they are supported by carers as well, who provide healthcare workers who provide sort of hands-on care as well, and really sense of community and team providing care for someone. And often when someone goes into care home, they have a named nurse who looks after them. So really engagement with the families and provide really personal care that suits this person's need with their experience of the nurses. And there's often a lot of fear, and people don't want to put their loved ones into a home because they feel like they can't cope. But in fact, when needs are so high, it's sometimes in the best interest that people need that round-the-clock care, which nursing homes deliver. And also, they are people's homes, and it's really, they provide a lot of activities and engagement as well to help with stimulation, and often families get to meet other families in similar situations as well, so you get that relationship building with other carers that helps prevent that sort of isolation and listening and supporting to some other carers. And also there's other choices in the care home. We often have a lot of different people with different swallowing conditions who need different diets. There's often a lot of choice with food as well that can be tailored to someone's sort of needs, and often sometimes there are added calories to food to help with that side of diet and sort of gaining weight. And with people with dementia, there's a lot of finger food options as well, which really helps take away that structure, but that more relaxed environment to help encourage people to eat. And also nursing homes have good links with GPs, so they have a good relationship with a GP, and often it's the same GP that visits the nursing home and is able to really get to know the residents and know the conditions as well. And at a nursing home, the nurse's responsibility to assess someone. So if someone does become unwell, they know exactly, they call the GP, they can call out of hours, and they can admit people into hospital because of their nursing experience. So they have a lot of high skill that can really meet people with more advanced stages of dementia as well. And also they do have links with palliative teams as well, and often people with dementia don't get that palliative care, and it's about supporting the family and linking with community services. So in a care home, they have so many access to other support very quickly as well, and often people in their own homes can take a little while to get referred to sort of palliative teams or specialist nurses in the community. So nursing homes create that link as well, that they can provide, and really sort of create a home for this person. Often people speaking to carers when they go to homes, they often feel like it's not their home, but we try to empower carers to really make the room their home as well, by putting personal objects in there, and photos, and really empowering the staff to get to know the person as well with dementia. And also I always say to carers, you are the experts in the care, you know that person better than anyone, and it's about building that really positive relationship with the care home, which really is a two-way situation. And often people feel that when they put someone into care, they are cut off, but it's, from my own experience as well, it's, you are still that carer, you still can provide that care, you can sit with someone and feed them, you can join in the activities with them as well. So it's not like you can't get involved, you're still very much involved, and part of that person is still part of the family as well. But sometimes people have so high care needs that they just need round the clock sort of nursing care, and that's what nursing care is about really. It's when it's in their best interest someone can be managed at home, but if their needs become so complex, nursing homes are there, nurses 24 hours a day to provide that individual care that person with dementia in sort of the later stages would need. But yeah, it's try to look at it as all the skills and opportunities and links with the community, and it's always that person's home.
Thanks, Hannah. Thank you. And it's really difficult, where do you go to for this? We've talked about being prepared, to having a look round, and the CQC website, as Lynn mentioned earlier, it does have the reports, the inspection reports, and it can give people a good view, but also asking recommendations from people. But it's really that personal choice of what you're looking for, and you're looking at a home. So when we all look for homes, where do we want to live? Some of us might want to live in a New York penthouse, whereas others would like to live in a Devon thatched cottage. There's so many different things to think about which will suit somebody's personal needs. So it's looking what it looks like, where it is. Do you want somewhere which is going to be easily accessible, that might not be perfect for you, but actually it's only just down the road, so as a family you can go and visit regularly. And I think it's what's going on within that care home. They come in all shapes and sizes, and I always sort of think about choosing schools for my children, and the different sort of schools. Do you want a sporty school, a musical school? Do you want an academic school, a big one, a small one? Lots of things to think about, which is going to actually suit sort of the needs of your loved one and where they're going to be happy. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, Hannah, is really important, is that relationship sort of with the staff, making sure that, you've got from the beginning, good open conversation. You can speak to the staff, you can really be involved in their care, and really having a look around to see that there's happy residents there. I think that's a big sort of plus sign, if you go in and you can see people being active, being motivated, enjoying living there. I remember going into a care home and seeing, a group of the residents in the kitchen, helping with the food preparation, washing up. They really felt that they had a role there. It was like their own home. And that's really how it should be. And also we have a checklist as well. There are various checklists that are around, but we will send out with the link from today with our resources, a checklist for people that they can go through and questions to ask. But I think what's really sort of important is to be mindful that what is going to be an amazing care home for one person isn't going to fit with the others, just because of their needs and their tastes and sort of what they want from them. So it's sort of understanding what is going to be right for that person. We understand as well that everybody that's here today is caring for somebody with a rare dementia, and education might be a bit of an issue. Not a lot of people have heard about PPA, PCA, FTD, and that can be quite scary when transitioning into a care home, that the staff aren't that knowledgeable. And we'd just like to add that we can help there. We are more than happy to help with the care home staff with more information to help sort of with that transition and the understanding to meet their needs. I'm just going to add in now for us, because both me and Hannah have both had parents that have lived for a while in in nursing homes, and share our experience. So, Hannah, do you want to talk a little bit about your mum now?
Yeah, so my mum had young onset Alzheimer's. She got diagnosed in her middle 50s and sadly deteriorated quite quickly, became psychotic and had to go to mental health unit, and her needs became really high and had to we decided in her best interest it was for her to go into a nursing home. It's quite a unique situation. My mum was actually a nurse. She actually in the 90s set up a care home and ran one for 15 years, and I spent a lot of my childhood in one. So it was an experience that we never thought would happen. Mum being very young, she was 59 when she needed to go into care. And it was really hard. It wasn't an easy situation. Mum was young. We had to look at different care homes and sort of decided which one was best for her. It was quite near. They had some experience of dealing with someone young, but I will never forget the first day that she was there. I can't say it's not easy to leave her there for the first day. Was quite a challenge, but for me, it was my positive experience, if I'm really honest. My dad was struggling. I was struggling. I had 2 young children under 5. I wanted to keep Mum at home, but we couldn't. But when she went into care, our relationship became closer because I spent some quality time with her. I was able to be part of her care still. I could see her in a room, we could engage, we could have that mother and daughter time. She may be in advance, maybe not recognise me at time, but I was there to be with her through the day and in the evenings as well. And being a nurse myself, I actually was able to help wash her at times if she became a bit didn't want to. So it was an experience for the whole family, became positive, and we were able to still be part of a family. We felt that it didn't feel like she was in care, that was it. She was somewhere else and we were at home. We still developed that relationship, and we made sure we had good communication with the care home. We decorated her room. We decorated it at Christmas. We put lights and decorations in there, and we really sort of embraced it. It was a challenging time. It was upsetting to see her deteriorate, and that's not where she wanted to be when she was working in a care home. But it was something that she had so high care needs that it was the best place for her for her needs, because the risk of being home, she was wandering, but we knew she was safe. but we could still be part of that family and spend time with her and develop that good relationship at the care home and have some nice memories at the late stage as well. I was able to spend some time just holding her hand in her room, which had her pictures, had her favourite things around. So it was hard. I can't say it wasn't hard, but it was in the best decision for her at that stage, and we couldn't cope at home, and they cared for her very well, so that's the main thing. So
thanks, Hannah. And I had a similar experience. My father had young onset Alzheimer's disease, or his was very frontal with his presentation, and he was sectioned a couple of times, so his needs were very complex. We had a bit of a bittersweet ride. We had 3 care homes. The first one was a very knee-jerk reaction and somewhere to find for him very quickly, which didn't last very long. And basically a phone call to my mother saying, can you not have him back home? Which was sort of really quite distressing when the situation was very dire. But finally, the second one also really couldn't meet his needs. The third care home we had was absolutely fantastic, and he lived there really happily for over 2 years. The staff were amazing. They really tuned into what his interests were. My father was a carpenter, so he liked sort of making things, and he basically, they gave him some sort of very safe tools to use. They gave him some furniture, some sandpaper. They gave him a room to use as a little workshop, and he went around the care home measuring everything up for them. But the staff were amazing. We had really good open communication, and even sort of his last days where we were there, all the family were all allowed to be there, which was absolutely amazing. It was so lovely that the cleaners, the cooks, the GP, everybody was coming in to sort of see him and saying what a wonderful man he was. And that was such a turnaround from sort of the distress of going into a care home. So I hope that you've taken a bit of information from today, and we've really put some options on the table for you. And if you're going through those decisions or want to talk about it, we're more than happy for you to get in contact, and we can have a chat with you and the family and reassure you and help point you in the right direction. So I will leave that there now, and I will hand back to Seb.
Thank you both very much, both with your professional and your personal hats on. Sharing so much is really generous and encouraging to others, I'm sure. So if I can encourage you to stay on screen, and also to invite other members of the panel back, so Lynn and Sarah Jane, and also it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Charlie Marshall, who will be known to a good number of you, particularly from the FTD and PPA support groups. Charlie's a consultant neurologist, and he's the dementia lead at the Wolston Institute of Preventative Medicine at Queen Mary's, University of London. So Charlie, an old friend, thank you so much for coming back to join us today and for all of your help. And thank you to all of you as speakers, and also all of you who are on the call, who have kindly sent through questions, and we're going to get stuck into those without further ado, if that's okay. So I will try to move the questions around the screen so you get to hear everyone a little bit more. One of the earliest questions we got in, I think it has been addressed by a number of you, particularly Lynn and Nikki, but I thought maybe just worth a quick recap as we start talking, and that's about how do you tell what is a good care home beyond sort of CQC and care home ratings. We heard, Lynn, you talk about the importance of personal recommendation, and Nikki, you had some more kind of on the ground recommendations about the kind of things you might look out for. Just wondering if anyone else had any, either of you or anyone else had any comments about other tips or strategies or things you found useful that just helped you to sort of resonate or know somewhere was the right place.
I think the first thing that I would say is there's lots of fantastic looking care homes out there, but all that glitters is not gold. And, you know, be very aware of that when you're visiting, and really sort of seeing sort of how the residents are and how the staff are engaging would be my top tip for looking at care homes. There's, as we said, you know, there's the inspection reports, and there's the rating. Really sort of I know it's difficult sort of at the moment with COVID times that, you know, there's restrictions on going into them, but the more information that you can get, and especially if you can see sort of the engagement, it's just seeing how the staff are with the residents and thinking, would they be like that with my husband, with my dad, with my wife? Seeing that engagement.
Thank you, Nikki. Anyone else want to comment on that one?
I think we touched on it before about location, isn't it? It's the practical side of it being quite local, so you can visit regularly as well. And like Nikki said, it's about how it feels when you go in, how the staff make you feel as well. And often we say little things. If you see a resident, is the cup near them? Can they reach the water? Are they thinking about those little things? And often it's your instinct that you feel. And I suppose speaking to some other carers and resident families, it's their experience might not be as good, but it's always about everyone has different needs and how they address that needs, and with the rare dementia as well, and if they're younger too, it's often don't be afraid to feel like to empower yourself to tell the care staff about the condition as well, often because that's that two-way education sometimes.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that one? Otherwise, I think I'll move on to a question about planning and I guess the unpredictability. So someone has commented, so I'm just finding myself. So someone has said, understanding the approximate timings of stages would be very helpful. My dad, who's aged 80, is the sole carer for my mum with advanced frontotemporal dementia. He's stubborn, so continues to care for her, and ultimately he's scared of the finances. The vagueness of stages makes planning difficult. I wondered if any of you would like to talk about the challenges you found in estimating, judging when was the right time. We heard Lynn, you talked very helpfully about little from early on to kind of get used to the idea of care, but how did you all judge when was the right time or when was the moment? Perhaps Lynn and then Sarah Jane.
I think for me, one of my, again, I think if people followed me around, they'd hear me saying a lot of the same things all of the time. You absolutely know when it's the right time. I find a lot of carers spend a lot of time feeling the guilt before things have happened. They're worried about, they're feeling guilty, I'm going to have to put mum into a home. It might not happen. It might happen, but my experience is that you do know when that time comes. Often there's an event, there's a change, something changes. And so I would say probably, you said the unpredictability, it is hard to plan. And I think somewhere along in the chat, people are talking about if they leave it, if they stay at home for too long, do they then leave it too late that the person becomes maybe too difficult to care for in a care home and a care home won't accept them? Again, often in my experience, as the journey goes on, sometimes people can become easier to look after in a practical sense, dependent on sort of, the behaviour, etc. So I think for me, I would try and let go of some of that worry, because I think it's almost you've got enough to do dealing with day to day, and you can do some research, you can have a look at some care homes. But that care home might not be right for your person when that time comes. They might need a very different sort of setup. So I know it's not necessarily helpful and maybe not the answer people are looking for. It's almost that you're living in the here and now and dealing with what's presenting today.
Thank you, Lynn. That's really helpful. Sarah Jane.
I think from my perspective, we were really lucky that we had such a great multidisciplinary team. It was certainly something that I knew would be an inevitability at some point. The financial element of it was really concerning. And in my mind, I wanted to make sure that we were sort of putting off that inevitability until the very, very last possible moment. Because, around my area, certainly, many of the care homes were well into the £100,000 mark a year. The best advice that I was given by our community psychiatric nurse was something that Nikki had touched on is, you know, all that glitters is not gold, and to try and look beyond the sort of the beauty and the aesthetic interior design and actually really focus on the fact that the nursing care that the homes are providing is what's fundamentally the most important thing. And when the funds are going into the quality of nursing care rather than the aesthetic of the actual building, that's something that it doesn't sit necessarily very well when you go in and you think, oh gosh, it doesn't look great, but actually it gives you a real sense of comfort to know that the quality of care is the best. My multidisciplinary team gave me a lot of support in not support so much, actually just reiterating that my gut feeling of when the right time was, that they concurred, and having many different people come in from the team and all actually assessing Adrian independently and coming to the same conclusion gave me the confidence that the time was right. And coinciding with the fact that I had become so unwell with multitasking, you know, the different aspects of family life and looking after Adrian's ever-changing needs, I had help in making that decision. And it was something that I'd said from the very outset, I didn't want to be solely responsible for. I wanted to be guided by the professionals.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Charlie, I wondered if I might come to you just for a brief comment on staging. With various of the support groups, as you know, we've tried to have kind of collective descriptions of the sort of average trajectory of some conditions, knowing that of course it will, the common phrase of it's different for everybody is simultaneously true and completely unhelpful. FTD is particularly challenging with the different underlying diagnoses and diseases. I just wondered if you had any comments on how you, with your own patients and people you care for, tackle this issue about that question of when and how fast and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think I think it's something that we know we need to have a better understanding of, and it's work that we're in the process of trying to do, because we need to kind of have an understanding of the average kind of the way in which these conditions progress. But I do agree that it's much more individual than that. So there's no way of predicting in any one person how things are going to develop and what the specific challenges are going to be at a future point in time. And it's those things that really dictate what they need more than the kind of average staging of the disease. So I think it's helpful to have a kind of a framework, but I don't, and I think we need to develop it, but I don't think it's necessarily helpful for deciding what sort of support an individual needs at a given point in time, because that's very much determined by the specific challenges that are being seen with that person at the time. And I think the other thing is that these conditions are quite different in the way that they develop. The PPA syndromes all start with language problems, but the different types of PPA develop different additional problems as time goes on. So it's certainly very helpful to think about the specific type of PPA and what the kind of future developments are likely to be. But in terms of saying when they're going to happen and exactly what support someone is going to need, that's very hard.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Another couple of questions that have come up relate to some of the people who are kind of in your environment when you're trying to make some of these decisions, different people supporting. Sarah Jane, you've mentioned the multidisciplinary team quite a lot, and some of the questions, so one person maybe come to Hannah perhaps, or Nikki, one person was asking, could you explain the role of a community psychiatric nurse? And also someone else was asking, when we think about professionals involved with diagnosis and the journey on from there, what's the difference between psychiatrists and psychologists? They say, I feel that psychologists would be more helpful on this journey. I don't know if any of you from either side of the professional or living with camp would like to comment on who is in the environment, but perhaps specifically to start with that role about the community psychiatric nurse. Hannah.
Shall I take that one? Yes, community psychiatric nurses are mental health nurses. They're often linked with mental health teams. and memory services, and they go into people's homes in the communities and assess people, their medication and behaviour, and look at supporting the family as well. And then there are links to the mental health team, and we'll go back and report to the multidisciplinary team and see what the needs of the person are. And often, they sit within a bigger team that will become a regular contact for families to monitor someone's behaviour and the condition or deterioration on that link, and build that relationship to get to know the person, and actually going to someone's house to see someone in the house and what they're like in their own environment, and the relationship and the reaction to family members that person might have, and any sort of triggers or anything like that they can help manage with as well.
Yeah, I think going on from that, and Sarah Jane, you'll probably reinforce this, is they are really essential, sort of, especially at this time. I certainly know from my own personal experience that, they were there to help make those decisions, however hard they are, as easy as possibly they can, and be very supportive. So they are a real essential link. We always have sort of the differences, because obviously we work with the DRC an awful lot, and we have our cognitive neurologists that are very, very good sort of when it comes to diagnosing, and the research and that specialism here. Later down the stage, we really do find that people do need their community mental health teams. I think they're essential for sort of later stages. And your bit of the psychiatrists and their psychologists, again, sort of it can be, we see people seeing psychologists and having psychological input at early stages to deal with the diagnosis. We see input sort of with carers, especially sort of later. It's difficult to say that somebody could have that service right the way through. It's, I think we have to manage people's expectations that, people can dip in out of services when they need, but to have that service to follow somebody throughout the journey, I really don't think is going to be a possibility. It has its sort of real important times, but I think sort of later stage you'll see the psychiatrists working very closely with the psychiatric nurses.
Thank you. Sarah Jane, your experience of the multidisciplinary team, did you, I guess sometimes people hear that term and perhaps worry that means there's a big team, lots of people, I won't be known consistently by anybody. What was your experience of that setup?
We were very lucky in that we were referred to the community psychiatric nurse via our Admiral nurse, who was phenomenal. And actually through that link, it opened up sort of a huge network of support that I even realize was there. So up until the point that we were introduced to the CPN, the Admiral nurse was there for me to give me support and to give me coping strategies to help Adrian. And she had said, it would be really nice if Adrian had somebody that he could talk to independently. And that's where the CPN came in. And off the back of that, so whenever our CPN came to see Adrian, we always worked in tandem. So we would spend some time together, just myself and the CPN, so that I could put him in the picture as to what the developments were, and he always then spent time with Adrian. But then the referrals to the home care team, the 24-hour team that were able to come in, so they're also psychiatric nurses and mental health nurses for out of hours, the social workers, the speech and language, it didn't feel as though the care was being diluted, or the identity or the needs were being diluted. Actually, it felt very comforting that we had a wider body of people independently coming in to see us and to assess, to form a much bigger picture, because I took great comfort in the fact that sort of different perspectives and different assessments were able to form a much bigger, more consolidated picture as to the reality of Adrian's complex needs.
That's really helpful, thank you. And also I think I'm sure there'll be lots of people, I've seen some comments flying around about people not having the opportunity to see certain people from certain professions. So I think it is worth saying that services are structured in slightly different ways and with a slightly different makeup in different places, but some of the core functions there should be good crossover. So just because you haven't, for example, ever seen a community psychiatric nurse doesn't mean necessarily that won't be someone in your local team who can provide much of the support that you've obviously.
Can I just suggest that where there is that variation, it's amazing how much variation there is. So I work somewhere where the memory clinic is commissioned to give a diagnosis and then never see somebody again ever. And the adjacent borough, the memory clinic, is commissioned to keep seeing people forever. And so there's a huge discrepancy. And, you know, the borough I work in does have kind of mental health care for older people, for people that need ongoing input, but it doesn't happen automatically. So the first thing I'd say is that you often do need to really jump up and down a lot, unfortunately, to get things to happen. And the other is that the one kind of fairly constant thing is that there's almost always a local branch of the Alzheimer's Society, and the people there do know how to activate things in the area. They have that kind of specific local expertise. And even if you don't have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, it can be worth engaging with them for local knowledge.
Great, thank you all very much. Sarah Jane, there have been many comments and compliments and expressions of gratitude for what you said and how helpful it's been. One of the questions that came in for you was just simply, how did you manage to get all the meetings that you mentioned in your talk? It must have been a real challenge for you, the person writes. They also said, did you have help getting the CHC funding? Because it's the first time that this person has heard of someone with FTD being successful.
Managing the schedule for the meetings was really tricky and pretty exhausting. I'm very lucky that my mum lives in central London. I'm in Ascot, so it's an hour and a half away. She would frequently come and just be at home and take over the care for Adrian while I had to pop out to meetings. But in reality, most of these meetings were taking place over the phone or on Zoom over the last 2 years, just due to COVID restrictions. And where possible, we had the professionals coming out to see me in the home environment. So I was able to just go into another room and make sure that Adrian was okay. But it was tricky juggling the schedule, obviously with school pickups, drop-offs, walking the dogs, and lunch times for Adrian. But yeah, I managed it with help from my mum and support. And I can't remember what the second part of that question was now.
Oh, that was okay. Maybe Nikki or Charlie can come in, or kind of about someone was surprised that they'd not heard of someone with FTD being successful with continuing healthcare funding before.
I can comment on that, certainly.
Thanks,
I think without wanting to get too much into the kind of it's really arbitrary that people who have physical health problems tend to get much more in terms of NHS funded support than if you have mainly kind of mental health or cognitive problems. And so the whole premise of continuing healthcare funding is if you have complex cognitive and physical problems, that you then become eligible to have your care needs funded by the NHS. And certainly people with FTD do sometimes develop those kind of physical care needs in addition to the kind of cognitive and behavioral ones. And you sort of there are different domains on the continuing healthcare assessment, and you need to score highly enough in a certain number of domains to become eligible for it. I encourage people to go for it a lot, because I think these are complex diseases that do have lots of difficult challenges that they throw up. And I think it's entirely appropriate for people to try at the stage when lots of these difficult problems are presenting themselves to get that continuing healthcare funding. My experience is that they always say no, at least first time, and you always have to appeal it. And you really need an advocate for that. So you need your kind of medical team and your social worker to be doing the jumping up and down at the same time you're doing the jumping up and down and appealing the decision. And sometimes you have to do that a couple of times to make any progress with it. So it's never straightforward. You never just ask and get a positive answer. It's a bit of a slog. But yes, it can be done for people in later stages of FTD and other dementias when there are kind of lots of physical support needs coming in as well.
And if it's okay just to link those two issues together. Charlie, you mentioned a few moments ago, I think you used the phrase of needing to jump up and down a lot. Sarah Jane, in your talk, you talked about being uber organized, and yet it was still a challenge. And perhaps just to link back to what Lynn was saying about getting a bit of help, seeing what you can take off your plate. I think a lot of the planning is not just about planning what will directly happen with your loved one, but also planning in just the amount of time that you're going to need to do that jumping up and down and that organizing. And that's sometimes where people, a little bit of help, some of those responsibilities around you being taken off your plate can be really helpful, and just give people the capacity either to do it at all or to do it and survive to tell the tale.
One more personal tip about the CHC thing is that I think that the social workers who are often responsible for coordinating the application find it very difficult because they're not used to it. They don't necessarily understand the rare dementia syndromes that well, and they're used to being knocked back, and they don't tend to have a lot of hope about it. So what I find really helpful is often I will get the phone number and pick up the phone to the social worker and say, I really think this is what this person needs. These are the reasons why. These are the specific needs of their syndrome. I'm happy to help support you in coordinating the application and making sure the information gets passed across. And that communication seems to make a huge difference. So if people do have somebody who they're seeing on the medical side who they can get to make that contact, that seems to often make a huge difference.
Thanks, Charlie.
The one piece of advice that was given to me by my Admiral nurse a long time ago was say yes to every single referral that comes your way, even if it's not particularly helpful, because the more people involved in supporting you and supporting the care needs of your loved one actually builds a much bigger foundation for your case if you are then going to apply for the funding. Specifically in my case, we had so many people involved, all putting their pennies worth in, their reports. It actually gave a lot of substance to our case. And when it comes to the point of going to sort of state your case in front of the team, the continuing healthcare team, you have that as backup to say, it's not just me, it's the speech and language therapist, it's the social worker, it's the child services, it's the social services, it's the CPN, it's the psychiatrist, it's the psychologist. And I think those are all, and the occupational therapist was invaluable in that as well. The more people involved, the more information can be gathered. And I'm not saying that you're going to be successful, but it will help in the long run.
Thank you. So really building that case. Thank you. That's really helpful advice. Just because we've had an almost unprecedented number of questions, I'm going to move on if that's okay. Lynn, I wondered if I could come to you with the next couple of questions. One was quite specific about just about hours and prices. Someone said, wrote, when Lynn says 8 hours of home care is the same price as a care home, what are the relative units of time? Do you mean that 8 hours per day is the same price as a day at a care facility?
Yeah, so in the area where I'm in southwest London, and typically a care home costs in the region of £1,500 per week. And if you're looking at, 26, we charge £26.50 per hour. So basically that's just the sum. 26.50 times 8 times 7 is the similar amount of money. So again, it's looking at, are there pressure points in the day that are driving your decision, or does the person, I think, as what I didn't mention, I also do understand that there is a time when the person may need 24-hour care that can be provided either through a living carer if you've got the facilities and the money, or by looking at where your pressure points are, that if you go to work and you need someone to step in your shoes for 8 hours a day, but you're there in the evening, especially for younger people, that's where the costs are. But again, unfortunately, it is all down to finance a lot of the time, that your house and things aren't taken into account for care in your own home. But very recently I had a conversation with a social worker about a client of ours. If our lady who's being assessed is deemed to need 24-hour care, the only option that the council will offer is a care home, not looking at options of care within their own home. So unfortunately, a lot of decisions are funding based as opposed to best interest and choice, really.
Thank you, but that's really helpful clarification. Another question came in from someone who's at the meeting who currently has a living carer. So they said, we've had living care for 2 to 3 years now. My wife's condition is such that I couldn't manage without the help, mentally as well as physically. At some point, her condition will have declined to the extent that her staying at home is not possible or practical. And I'm concerned that keeping her at home for as long as possible, which is my preference, will reduce the number of care facilities willing to take her on by the time this becomes our only option. Can you offer any advice on this? Lynn, I wonder if I could come back to you. So that's sort of that idea of what's the relationship between home care and potential.
Yeah, and I think that's a question I sort of noted earlier, that quite often a progression might make someone easier to look after, and I think that's always it's a sad thing to sort of acknowledge sometimes, that maybe some of those risky behaviours, the behaviours where someone wants to go out on their own, they've got that drive that they want to go to work, they want to do all sorts of things. Sometimes some of that will go, and some of the care might become a little bit more physical care, you know, the helping getting washed and dressed, etc. So conversely, it might be that actually you've got more choice, and it may be that they don't need a home anyway. So I personally wouldn't worry about that, because I think you just don't know. I said, like, yeah, unhelpfully, it's really hard to predict what will happen. But yeah, I said, often I think people become easier to care for as time goes on.
Thank you, Lynn. Hannah, did you want to come in on that?
I was going to say that local hospices offer a lot of community support as well. When people advance into later stages, that people can link into as well to support people in their own homes at the end stages. So often people think hospice is cancer, but they do offer dementia service support as well, holistic support to support the family with the people with higher needs as well.
That's another really helpful option. Thank you. Another question that's come up, the listener says, in listening to Nikki and Hannah, I feel that the speakers are perhaps not recognising the restrictions brought about by COVID. And obviously you were talking about your own experiences in recent times, but perhaps a few years ago. The person was asking, are there any updated regulations around COVID and which might influence people's choice about care homes or nursing homes?
Well, I think we're in a very grey area still, aren't we, with COVID? With I've got sympathy on both sides. I've got sympathy for families who can't see their relatives in care homes, and I think I've got sympathy for care homes who are lacking guidelines or really direct instructions from the government here. I don't want to get political on here. It's not appropriate, but I think it's, you know, we've had a very difficult time sort of over the last couple of years with people not being able to see their loved ones. I know, you know, lots of friends and colleagues have got loved ones in care homes, and it's been really, really difficult. Me and Hannah both were in a very luxurious position where it was pre-COVID, so you know we were allowed to go and visit and do everything that we wanted to do, which is not possible. I think from my experience with friends that I have which do have loved ones in care homes, having that open communication with the care homes and sort of negotiating with them on the best level possible of what is possible, what can we do, you know, to visit, to have a look round, to, you know, if you've got loved ones in care homes, having that agreement with them. It's difficult, it's tough, because each care home are really left to their own devices at the moment of making up their own rules and regulations, and I'm sure they're doing it in the interest of keeping everybody safe. That is the ultimate goal, but it can be very unfortunate when you know that at one care home they're allowing visits and another that they're not. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answer for that one. Sarah Jane, do you have anything to say with, you know, Adrian at the moment? You're on mute, darling.
Sorry, I think I was just having a coughing fit beforehand. I think obviously they're taking COVID very, very seriously, and I have to do a lateral flow every time I go and see him. They're all tested very regularly. I think staffing issues, it sort of complicated the transition, just because staffing issues, I think, are difficult at the best of times. If someone just tests positive on a lateral flow, it means automatically they have to go home, 10 days self-isolation. If that happens to be the clinical manager and they haven't got anybody else to, fill in their shoes during those 10 days, that's when it can get tricky. And I did notice a period of time when he was in quite early on, where not everything was being done as it should be. Things were being dropped, and it was about constantly trying to pick them up on it and working with them. They're juggling their staffing to try and bring people in. So that's, I think, a different aspect of COVID, not in terms of the regulations, but it makes life so much more difficult, because in a perfect world, you'd have a fully staffed team, everyone's got their jobs and they'd have backup, but it doesn't always work like that.
Yeah, just to say that the combined dementia charities are very much pushing for changes. It sadly won't come early enough for a lot of people, but for changes, for example, to the Care Act, where the Care Act entitles you to have, it's obligatory for you to have the right medication, for you to have a choice over your food, but it isn't currently legally your right to have sustained critical relationships with your family and contact with them, and things like that may change as a result of the situation, but we will see. I'm just very conscious of time. We've had numerous questions which we will share, because so many of you generously in your questions also shared something about your experiences, which may be helpful for others. I'm just going to try and squeeze in a couple more, if that's okay, before we draw to a close. One was a financial question for Lynn. Someone said, my husband David is 64 years old and has been in a nursing home since April. We have paid £43,000 for care so far. Once his money runs out, how much am I expected to top up from my savings, as I'm not working and I'm living on my savings? I've asked the home to do a continuing healthcare assessment.
I'm not an expert in funding for care homes, I have to say. My understanding is that it's the person's it's the person with the care needs finances that are assessed, not the finances of the person who remains. And again, my understanding is that if there's a dependent or someone else living in the property, that shouldn't be taken into account either. The best person to speak to about that would be either your local Age UK, which are a national organisation, and they've got loads of information about what your rights are. So I probably can't really answer that, because it would be wrong of me. I'm not a financial advisor.
No, that's absolutely fine, Lynn. Thank you. Nikki, did you want to comment, or just perhaps meant to mention Trish and the legal team as well?
Yeah, so we do get questions quite often regarding this, and everybody's circumstance is different, and we go with the rules. As Lynn said, it is the person who's going into care, so we're looking at their assets. But we have Trish, who should be here today but unfortunately isn't, who can give some great advice there. We also have Michael and our legal team, who can also give some advice on where you stand sort of legally in these positions. So whoever answers that question, if they send an email to us at contact@ with a bit more specifics, and we can get some specific advice for you there.
Okay, thank you very much. So our last question of the ones we have time for today, I just wanted, because it raises the topic of respite, which you haven't touched on quite so much today. So the question says, Mum has logopenic variant primary progressive aphasia and is booked into a care home for 4 weeks of respite. She's at a moderate stage and her sequential memory is being affected. I understand repetition is key to keeping skills for her, and she currently lives alone, supported by me, but I'm worried that 4 weeks away from home may lead to her losing some of her abilities. Do you have any comments? Charlie, Nikki, Lynn, I wondered if any of you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, sure, I can speak to that. I think the short answer is no, I wouldn't worry about that. I think that we know that general kind of cognitive stimulation is probably helpful a bit for maintaining some abilities, but it's not that there's any specific thing that you need to keep doing every day. And actually being in a different environment and having social interaction with different people is very, very good cognitive stimulation. And I think that in itself would be a very positive experience that will be good for the brain. So I would support that.
I would just add in it. Yeah, it's a great opportunity, to be quite honest. You know, if she lives on her own, there'll be lots of people to engage with. There'll be probably a social activities coordinator there, which will be doing lots of fun things. The one bit of advice, as I would say, going into respite, is give them as much information about your mum as possible, all her likes and dislikes. Take a "this is me," but a really good summary of what mum really enjoys doing, so they've got lots of things to really hone in on while she's in there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Very reluctantly, the clock has just turned to 11:30, so I think it's my duty to draw the meeting to a close. I wanted to say a huge thank you, not just to our speakers, but also to Alicia and Shema, who are behind the scenes organising and bringing us all together, and of course to you all for being here and for sharing so generously of your experiences. As we've mentioned, resources, quotes, and other questions will be addressed and shared after the meeting. And just the last couple of things I wanted to mention is if you're looking and have the capacity to participate, then the Rare Dementia Support Impact Study, which involves talking to a member of the team and sharing your experiences and answering some questions on some standard scales about the impact these conditions have had on you and how you've coped, is still looking for participants, and we'd be very pleased to speak to any of you if you'd feel willing to share your experience that way, as we try and understand the benefits and how we can try and change things for all of you living with rare forms of dementia. And also, just after the panel and I disappear off the screen, there'll also be a short video from Eva Tate and her colleagues at the National Brain Appeal talking about how we fund some of this rare dementia support work. But in the meantime, the most important thing is to say thank you all for being here. Please do be in touch with Nikki and the team at contact at raredementiasupport.org after the meeting, and always in between meetings, if you need support, be it practical, emotional or otherwise, and if anything that we can't provide, the team will be very happy to point you in the right direction. And yes, thank you for being part of these sessions, because without you we wouldn't have such a rich set of questions and topics to discuss. So huge thanks once again. We'll leave you in peace, and I hope you can enjoy some of the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Hello, my name is Eva Tate and I'm the Major Appeals Manager and Manager of the Rare Dementia Support Fund held by the charity the National Brain Appeal. The National Brain Appeal raises money as the dedicated charity for the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery and UCL Queen's Square Institute of Neurology. The National Brain Appeal raises funds for Rare Dementia Support's 2,000 members to help individuals living with rare and early onset forms of dementia, their families, friends, and healthcare professionals. And we also hold several other funds for FTD and dementia research. The funding helps not only the support group meetings in London, but also the regional support groups, admin and support staff, and all other associated expenses, including the new online support groups. When things return to normal, there are travel and accommodation bursaries available to help members attend the meetings. This year, we've raised our fundraising target to 300,000, and this will rise further to 350,000 by 2022 to develop and extend the service in the areas of education, support, and research, with the ultimate aim that everyone affected by a form of rare dementia will have access to specialist information and support, as well as contact with other people with a similar condition. We apply for grants from grant-making trusts, foundations and livery companies, and have a wonderful group of supporters, some of whom are here today, who fundraise for us in an amazing variety of ways. We would love it if you would like to sign up to our RDS fundraising newsletter to hear more of these stories and receive news of how we can support this community. We have had people do head shaves for us. We have had a gentleman drive across the Mongolian steppe in a VW Polo, and we have lots of people who take part in runs and virtual runs as well. At the end of February, we held a gala dinner called Mission Possible, where we raised 110,000 for the expansion of rare dementia support. And we are delighted to announce that in line with this expansion, the charity is committed to raise up to 7 million to create the world's first centre of excellence for rare dementias. If anyone would like to discuss any fundraising ideas or the new capital appeal, please do feel free to email me or my colleague Alexis, our Senior Fundraising Manager, who will speak about the innovative new ways you can be involved in fundraising for RDS, even during this challenging time. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Alexis Gebby and I'm the Senior Fundraising Officer at the National Brain Appeal. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to all of you who already fundraise for RDS. We really appreciate all of your incredible efforts, especially at this difficult time. My role at the National Brain Appeal is to look after all the amazing people taking on various fundraising activities for us. We have had people challenging themselves to run marathons, cycle long distances, climb mountains, and even take on skydives, all whilst raising money for RDS. We also have wonderful fundraisers out in the community who organise golf days, hold coffee mornings, host choir and carol concerts, and even shave their heads. These people ensure that more people like you can be supported through rare dementia support. If you're interested in becoming one of our fundraising heroes, then please do contact me. I am here to support you with your fundraising, and I'm more than happy to chat about any ideas that you may have. While at the moment it isn't possible to take part in a sporting challenge or hold a big fundraising gathering in your local community, we do have some fundraising ideas, such as taking on a solo virtual run or walk, hosting a quiz for your friends or family online, asking for birthday donations in lieu of going out, or even donating money that you may be saving by not travelling to work or buying your daily coffee. Do get in touch with me if you would like to get involved. In the meantime, take care and we hope to see you soon.